My guest this morning to shed some more light on this issue of living with tribal marks is Samson Obed Apia. He's a lecturer at the Department of Sociology, University of Ghana here in Legon. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
It's good to see you again.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Right. So, tribal marks. Yeah. How did they come about?
Thank you very much. Though the origin is not well documented, there are several stories as to how it's originated, but it is believed that, as Greek historians have documented, the whole practice of tribal marks dates back to the 5th century before Christ. That's
Did
BC.
you say Greek
historians?
So that means it's not something that's peculiar to just black Africans alone.
No, but even the argument of that, it started in Egypt. Where some strangers who used to live in Egypt use knives to mark their foreheads so as to differentiate themselves from the Egyptians.
I see.
So it was, but later down, several centuries down the lane, several African kings who were invading other kingdoms for the land and the resources also used tribal marks as a means of differentiating themselves from their captured kings and their people. So that was how. So the argument.
So basically, it was a form of identification.
That is the very key essence of it traditionally. So the belief was that it started in Egypt, where some strangers who stayed in Egypt used the practice as a means of differentiating themselves from the Egyptians. Then centuries down the line, most of the African kings who started invading other kingdoms for slaves, etc., used the marks because when they captured those people, they considered them as slaves. So the marks they used to mark themselves and their family was distinct as a means of differentiating them as royals or people from their captured slaves.
I see. Talking about distinct, let's talk about the various designs. We watched that clip there, and there were all sorts of different designs, ranging from just maybe one mark here or there to full-on designs. So what's the history behind the designs as well?
The point was that normally it depends on every culture and society. So normally some are vertical, some are horizontal, and some are just one stroke, some are three. So it depends on the culture and the society. Because it was a means of identification,
everyone had to come up with their own
way of identify them. Even that's one of the respondents talked about. Even royals or people from the royal families have their own way of identifying themselves. But in terms of the purpose, as you rightly said, it is for the identification, which is the main thing. In terms of identification, the belief was that traditional society, the marks were used by a proud father to express the legitimacy of the child who is born. So most traditional societies, a father will have to give the mark to the child to express his legitimacy. So if the father does not do that, it means that the child is not the legitimate child of the father. Other people also use that as a means of, identifying the child. So in most societies, you can even identify the child, the house he comes from, the lineage, as well as the family and the ethnic group. So it was a means of identification. So people with similar tribal marks seemed to be from the same place. So it was a means of sharing common interests as well. Then apart from that, it was also considered to be a medicinal or traditional medical treatment that children who had convulsion, traditional herbalists were able to use it as a means of inserting herbs, and which most of
was this necessarily true? Did it work?
According to them it worked. So from the accounts that we've read or talked to more traditional people, they believe was that those herbs have medicinal value. So once they inserted it on the children, it was believed to work. Then apart from that, it was also used for spiritual protection. Now the point was, those societies where the mortality rates were very high, you have a woman giving birth to 2 or 3 with all dying. Now what they did was that when a woman gives birth to 2 or 3 and they've all died, the next one who is born is given the tribal mark. Now the essence was that once the mark was given,
they can't go and come back again.
The goals from taking the child back. So most of the time, so some of them are very horrific. So it was a means of making the child ugly.
So the girls
don't take the child again. And even in cases where those childs die, it is also a reflection that the gods or ancestors have rejected the child. So that if the child is coming back, they believe in this reincarnation. So they want to see whether those marks were still there.
So there's a kind of cultural connotation as well.
Yes, so the culture is that, as I said, for identification basically, as well as the issue of showing people the kind of where they come from, as well as the medicinal value as well.
Are there any advantages at all to
Yeah, so as we said, to the traditional people, it was advantageous in the means that those days there were no means of identity. So for most of them, the tribal marks were a unique way of identifying people from, as I said, a particular family or an ethnic group. So many people will tell you that it was a means of giving them a pride. For example, one Nigerian lecturer friend told me about the case in Nigeria where in every typical Yoruba who understands the tribal mark will see himself as a proud Yoruba from a particular village. So those two, they wear some kind of patriotism and a sense of pride. So for them, if not for these tribal marks, it would have been difficult for them to identify people. And the argument also was in those days where there were criminals, how will you identify a particular person from a particular ethnic group from the other people? So for them, it was a means of identification. That's the benefit for them. So
that was the basic.
And apart from that, also the issue about the children who were medicinal values. Yeah. So basically, these were things.
So there were some advantages.
Yeah.
I see. What about the disadvantages?
Yeah, that is a very important thing that I always want to look at as a sociologist. Now we believe that traditions or cultures are not static; they are dynamic. So in contemporary times, many people
that means they should change as time goes on.
And the disadvantage or the demerits are so much. Apart from the pain that the children go through, the risk of infection.
When you talk about pain, you're talking about the process. Yeah,
because these were using sharp, objects, knives, etc. And you see, you should also understand that these were things that were done to people who did not know anything about it. So as one of the guys said, when he grew consent. Yes. So as the female genital mutilation, these are things that were done to people. So the pain.
At about what age?
Between some as early as 3-4 months, or around 4-5 years. So children, in many cases where the child becomes even sick, it can be as early as 2-3 months because they needed to treat the convulsion. So the argument is that the pain, the risk of infection, the HIV and co, and also the scorn and the discrimination. You see, the point is that most of the people who go to this tribal mark, in their cultural setting on their traditional areas, it is a sense of pride. But once you move from one geography to another place,
even in those times,
yes, people begin to see you differently, and even contemporary times. So the point is that many people have seen it as a means of, makes them inferior. For example, apart from the pain and the discrimination and the scorn, and the most bad aspect of it is children in schools where a lot of this discrimination and scorn goes on. And the point is, a lot of the time the children are given names. For example, some are called railway lines.
So even in those days when it was acceptable as a form of identification, it still wasn't acceptable by some
it was members of the society. It was. People accepted this as a means of identification.
By children,
yeah. So in those situations, the scorn was not so much. But the point in contemporary times where the importance of these things are lost to us, most people see it now as as I said, in your own locality or culture, it was accepted in a way in the past. But we move to another place where people don't understand those. That is where the discrimination comes in. Now in contemporary times, the kind of names, as I said, some are called railway lines, some are called everlasting tears, some are called.
What does that mean?
Yeah, because of the
everlasting tears. Okay,
yeah.
Tears.
Some are called kennels, not in the army, but the number of stripes they have on their faces. And I read of a story where a child from Nigeria, through a friend, made a point that when they begin to call him those names, he felt like leaving the school. And a girl even went to the teacher to tell the teacher that she, told the mother in a plain face, thanking her for not allowing him to go to that. Or if she had, should have think of committing suicide. So you can imagine the kind of serious, So because the point is, you can imagine how you feel when people begin to call you names just because of something you had no idea about as a child. So in contemporary times, I believe that it has outlived its importance in our modern time, because that is why you see that people are now moving on to this of tattooing on their bodies. That is a new kind of fashionable trend you can see now. But that one, these people do it at the different parts of their body, which may not be seen as, discriminated as
as a sociologist, would you agree with the justification associated with tribal marks?
No, I personally think that even I'm one person who believes in bringing African traditional culture and traditions. Tribal marks are one of the things I will not support in contemporary times. You see, the reason being that apart from the human rights issues about it, these are things done to people who have no consent. For me, if the child accepts it, fine. But these are things that are done to very young ages.
So if it's done with consent, then you're fine with
it. But these are things that are done without the child's consent. And the point is, that's one of the people said, they grow up with it where he begins to see what he goes through. So I have always said that, okay, if it was a means of identification, now we have better ways of identifying people. So I've always told people that let's keep our ID cards in our pockets and our wallets, not on our faces.
So we don't need to mark ourselves.
Yes. Secondly, we can also teach people about the norms of the cultural values of our societies. For example, being humble, being very hardworking, so that when we see people from a particular ethnic group, we can use those behavioral patterns to identify them or distinguish them, rather than using tribal marks as a way of identifying them. So for me, we can keep our identity cards in our pocket and wallets, rather than keeping it on our faces to show to people.
Human rights activists call this barbaric. Do you agree?
Yeah, in contemporary terms, I agree with it. That it is a way of disfiguring people. And for me, I personally think that, and I can imagine how you were responding when some of the pictures were being shown. So you can imagine, as a young girl or a boy, you look at one student once told me, when he looked at herself in the mirror, she felt ashamed for the parents of allowed her to go through that. So you see, you can see the pain people go through. People may even think of committing suicide because of some of these things. So I believe personally that it is not something that we should support. And I agree with human rights activists that it is barbaric and should not be allowed to continue.
Is it a crime? Is it a crime?
Currently in Ghana, it's not a crime. Yeah, but in some part of Nigeria, some of the states in Nigeria, the states have passed laws to abolish it. So I think people are also calling that here. But see, the point is, there's one thing I've always said about our situation in Ghana: we have laws covering everything. The problem is the enforcement of, and it is also because people are not educated, because you cannot sit in Accra in Parliament and pass a law whilst in a village in a northern region. So we should rather educate people. Let's go to those communities. That's the
so is there a law covering tribal marks?
Not really now, but what I say that if we think of a law in the future, I think we should start with the education. Let people understand that yes, these were your unique ways of identifying people in the past, but in contemporary times, you can get better ways of identifying them. But if we sit in Accra and pass the law, I can assure you, people will still hide and do these things.
And still do it.
Yes.
Okay, so for someone living with it now, how would you advise them to overcome their self-esteem issues and their confidence issues?
Yeah, I personally think that the people or the person should get to know that this is something that is circumstance of history. They have no hand in it. And I know it is not easy. But the point also is that they need to live with it and understand that they have no hand in it. So no matter what happens, they should still feel as they are, their persons, and know that whichever way they live, it is part of their lives. And you see, as people can even do plastic surgery now to correct them. But the point is, how many people can afford that? So for me, I think that we must also educate other people that these are people's way of life. So we must also be careful not to, make them feel so inferior and make them feel comfort in society. So we also have a role to play as society, that let's accept people as they are. This is something that they happen to them not because of their own decisions. It is culture or their tradition that gave them. So it is one side, they must also have the self-confidence and live with it, but we must also begin to see that it is part of their lives and accommodate them. Yeah.
And moving forward, you'd also advise that it should be abolished.
It's abolished. Yeah. Personally, I think that should be abolished. As I said, we should rather keep identity in our pockets, in our wallets, rather than keep it in our faces.
All right. Thank you very much for your time this morning. Samson Obedapia is a lecturer from the Department of Sociology at the University of Ghana, Legon, and he joined us to talk about living with tribal marks on our social blog this morning.